this geoengineering idea in its simplest form is basically the following. You could put fine particles, say sulfuric acid particles, sulfates, into the upper atmosphere, the stratosphere, where they'd reflect away sunlight and cool the planet. And I know for certain that that will work. Not that there aren't side effects, but I know for certain it will work. And the reason is it's been done. And it was done not by us, not by me, but by nature. Here's Mount Pinatubo in the early 90s that put a whole bunch of sulfur in the stratosphere with a sort of atomic bomb-like cloud, and the result of that was pretty dramatic. After that and some previous volcanoes we have, you see a quite dramatic cooling of the atmosphere.
Many scientists and environmentalists have raised concerns about geoengineering technologies designed to intervene in the functioning of the Earth system as a whole. Speaking on Democracy Now! In 2010, Indian scientist and activist Vandana Shiva warned about some of the dangers.
These shortcuts that are attempted from places of power, and I would add places of ignorance, of the ecological web of life, are then creating the war solution, because geoengineering becomes war on a planetary scale with ignorance and blind spots, instead of taking the real path, which is helping communities adapt and become resilient.
Well, our next guest has written a new book that lays out the arguments for and against climate engineering and reveals the extent of vested interests linking researchers, venture capitalists, and corporations. We're joined by Clive Hamilton, Professor of Public Ethics at Charles Sturt University in Canberra, Australia. He's the author of Earth Masters, The Dawn of the Age of Climate Engineering. Clive Hamilton, welcome to Democracy Now!
Amy.
So what is climate engineering?
Well, it's a range of schemes that are being developed by scientists, particularly in the US, to essentially try to counter the effects of global warming by technological interventions in the global climate system. They range from the benign, such as making biochar, a kind of charcoal, through to the science fiction, like putting a cloud of mirrors in space to deflect some sunlight, to probably the premier scheme that receives most attention and which, in my view, is very likely to be implemented in perhaps 20, 30 years' time, the one that David Keith mentioned, the idea of essentially installing a solar shield, a layer of sulfate particles around the Earth to deflect a certain proportion of incoming solar radiation. So in other words, to regulate the amount of sunlight reaching the Earth.
So why did you decide to write this book?
Well, I wrote a previous book called Requiem for a Species, Why We Resist the Truth About Climate Change, which, as the title suggests, went into detail of why it is that here we are in the beginning of the 20th century, where there's an overwhelming consensus of scientific evidence saying we're in really deep trouble. And yet we're not doing anything about it, or our actions are trivial. And so it seems to me, as long as that goes on, as long as the scientists continue to ring the alarm bell ever more loudly, and as long as governments around the world fail to respond to those warnings, in other words, if Plan A isn't working, then people are going to resort to Plan B, and that is geoengineering. And that's why there's been this boom in interest, both from scientists and from other people, in these schemes to essentially take control of the climate system of planet Earth.